What happens to a memory when the world forgets it, but God does not? There are tales that live in the earth's bones, not carved in stone, but murmured in sleep by mountains that once watched angels fall. Tales that the rivers carry still, in hushed tones beneath the roar of the waters. Not all scriptures were written. Not all truth survived the flood with the living. Some truths went down into the depths and waited. The Book of the Giants is not a tale that men have guarded well. It is not told in synagogues, nor preached from the minarets. It lies shattered like broken teeth from a giant's skull, fragments scattered across the sands of ancient Mesopotamia, the highlands of Qumran, the dusty caves where Enoch once walked with eyes turned toward the throne. And yet, still it whispers. If you close your eyes now, truly close them, you may hear it. The wind will not speak, but you will feel it pulling, like the breath of something long dead and longer mourned. It will not say a name, but your bones will shiver as though they remember a fear your soul has never known. There was once a race not born of Adam, nor fully of the angels. Children of rebellion, born from lust and glory, raised in ruin. They were giants in body, yes, but also in mind, in sorrow, in defiance, in fall. And the first of them, oh, the very first, did not even have a name we are permitted to speak. The Watchers had descended, you see. And the earth had opened to them like a garden never guarded. These were not like men whose bodies were bent and small from sin. These were sons of heaven, unfallen yet unwise. They beheld the daughters of earth, and the stars in their blood stirred. Their leader, Samyaza, was not the boldest, but he bore the heaviest burden. For when the pact was made atop Mount Hermon, when 200 angels sealed their fate with a curse, it was Samyaza's voice that thundered the vow. His feet that trembled upon that ancient rock, his hands that did not yet know they would father destruction. They came down, and with them came knowledge. Roots split, stones bled, fire obeyed. The angels taught what heaven had hidden. The secrets of the heavens stars mapped and bound. The forging of blades, the brewing of colors, the nomming of beasts, charms to sway the will, the bending of roots into poisons, and worse, how life itself could be twisted. They taught, and the daughters of men bore them children. But not children like you and I know. These were giants mighty and terrible, each one born with a hunger that the earth itself could not satisfy. They towered, these offspring, over their mortal kin. Their voices shook mountains. Their steps cracked the backs of rivers. Their laughter made the animals flee. Their dreams became the nightmares of men. And yet they were not wholly cruel. They wept. They remembered heaven, not in words, but in silence, in ache, in that longing that never leaves the marrow. Fire buried in snow. Their souls, some say, were too vast to contain. Their sleep was disturbed by visions, not of war, but of heaven's face turned away. And when they asked their fathers, the Watchers, about the dreams, the Watchers wept too, for they knew. They had made sons not just of flesh and fire, but of doom. It is said that one of them, Mahway, the giant born of Samyaza himself, began to fear, not for his life, but for his soul. The stars no longer sang. The earth began to cough blood. The skies turned the color of bruised sorrow. Mahway dreamed of the coming flood before men even heard of rain. In his dream, he saw a tablet swallowed by the deep. Upon it, words not written by any hand, but burned into the stone by divine will. Words that weep, words that judge. He awoke with his face pressed to the mud, and the rivers near him had all fled their banks as if trying to escape. It was then he went seeking, not war, not blood, but answers, and so the tale turns. For Mahway, mighty in stature, cursed in birth, would rise on wings of fire to find the only man who still walked with angels, Enoch, the scribe of God, the one who walked among the Watchers before they fell, the one who had been taken into the heavens not by death but by longing, Enoch, the keeper of dreams, Enoch, the voice who wrote what men were never meant to read. But Mahway did not know if such a man still breathed. The heavens had gone silent. The mountains no longer echoed with prophecy. And yet, the dream had said, "Find the one who still writes in light." So Mahway began his journey, a giant seeking truth, a child of ruin searching for hope. And the sky did not strike him down, not yet. If your ears still linger upon these words, then perhaps this tale was always meant for you. Leave a gentle whisper in the comments, telling from where you listen beneath the night. And if your heart is quietly stirred, let it press upon like. Share these words with another wanderer of the dark. And subscribe that the next hidden tale may find its way to you in silence. And now, there are footsteps that never truly vanish. They remain in the bones of the earth, pressed deep in the soil beneath fallen cities, beneath the rivers that once knew their weight. Mahways were such steps, thunderous, yet unsure. Not the stride of a conqueror, but of a soul burdened by a hunger that could no longer be fed by flesh or war. He was not alone in body, but in spirit, utterly forsaken. Above him the sky held its breath. Below him the valleys remembered. Every tree he passed bowed with ancient dread, every breeze curled away from his scent, for the earth itself had known his kind before. And it did not rejoice, but Mahway did not raise his fists. He did not call the winds to obey, nor tear the mountains for fun. The dreams had hollowed him. Something inside had broken, and now he searched not for conquest, but for the last light. Enoch. The name clung to him like smoke. He did not know if it had come from his father's old whispers or from the dream that scorched his nights, but it pulsed in his blood, a summons written before he was born. It was said Enoch had vanished, that he had walked with the watchers before their fall, spoken with the stars before they ceased to sing, and had been taken, lifted, not by death but by God's choosing. No grave, no bones, no decay, only light. Some said he was no longer a man, but a spirit bound in fire, scribing on scrolls that only angels could read. Others said he wandered the realms between breath and silence, neither dead nor alive, but writing still. Mahway did not know which was true, only that he had to find him. Days turned, and so did the sky. Mahway walked through forgotten lands, where men once knelt before idols that no longer had names. He crossed old ruins where giants like him had danced in blood, and now only bones remained. He saw remnants of his kin, mighty ones, now fallen into dust, their crowns rusted, their weapons cracked, their eyes empty hollows in the dirt. They had not dreamt as he had. They had laughed when the skies darkened, had mocked the rumbling beneath the hills, had devoured and conquered and roared, but they had not listened. And so they had died. Somehow Mahway had survived. Not by power, but by trembling. The dream had spared him and scarred him. It was near the ruins of a once sacred grove that he found the first sign. Not a voice, not a light, a sound, soft, faint, like the scratching of bone against stone. Mahway slowed. The trees here did not shrink. They stood tall, proud, even, as though guarding something. The air was different. It shimmered like breath from a world not wholly here. He stepped forward, the ground no longer cracking beneath him. The wind stilled. And there, beneath a stone half swallowed by moss and time, he saw it. A mark, not a rune of war, not a sigil of angels. A letter burned into the stone, the tongue of heaven. It glowed faintly, only for a moment, but it was enough. Mahway fell to his knees, his great form trembling, and for the first time in 100 years he wept. Because the mark was not just a symbol, it was a question. Who still listens? Mahway placed his hand upon the stone, and for a moment, just a breath, he felt the warmth of another soul. Enoch. He was not gone, he was near. And so Mahway followed the trail. Not of footprints, for Enoch left none, but of whispers. A second mark led to a cavern where no bird dared sing. A third was carved in the bark of a tree that bore no fruit but wept sap like tears. A fourth floated, yes, floated above a still pool, words etched in light, fatting if looked upon too long. Each sign was a wound in the world, a door cracked slightly open, a breath stolen from a realm not made for flesh, and each one bore the same message: you were not forgotten. But Mahway began to feel the weight of another truth pressing upon him. He was not the only one seeking Enoch. There were others, shadows, not born of heaven nor fully of earth, twisted things, spirits without form, faces without memory. Some were his brothers, fallen, mad, no longer bound by body but by hunger. Others were darker still, remnants of the Watchers, their glory gone, their form punished, still roaming as smoke and storm and disease. They had also dreamt, and they did not seek answers, they sought to silence them. One night, as Mahway slept beneath the whispering rock, he heard a voice, but it was not Enoch. It was the voice of Azazel, the forger of blades, the bringer of blood, the one who taught men how to kill. His voice was not sound. It was sensation, like ash in the mouth. Like the scream of a child swallowed by silence. You seek the scribe, it rasped, but you carry the curse. Mahway did not respond. The voice laughed, or perhaps it bled. You were made to devour, and now you crawl like a lamb. Mahway opened his eyes, and the trees around him were burning, yet not consumed. The sky cracked above him, yet there was no thunder. He rose, and he whispered a truth not his own. I was made to fall, but not to forget. The fire ceased. The sky closed. The voice fled. And Mahway knew then, the journey was not only to find Enoch, it was to be seen by him, judged, named, remembered, and perhaps forgiven. It was not morning when Mahway found him. No light broke the sky. No birds sang. It was the hour between silence and dawn, when even the angels hold their breath and the jinn retreat beneath the stones. Mahway came to the mouth of a canyon where the earth itself seemed to bow, not violently, not in surrender, but in reverence. The rocks there bore no moss, no lichen, no dust, only silence, a stillness that hummed like prayer. He stepped in, and the moment his foot crossed the threshold, the sound of the world vanished. No breath, no echo, not even the beating of his own vast heart. Time did not move there, or if it did so like a shadow crossing water, too gently to name. And in the center of that canyon sat a figure, small, still, writing. No scrolls surrounded him, no throne, no fire, only a single stone, smooth and low, and on it light. Not like the sun, not like fire. A soft, living glow that moved as ink might on water, dancing beneath the scribe's fingers. Enoch, the man who walked with God. Mahway dared not speak, not because he feared judgment, but because his soul knew this man did not write with his hands alone. He wrote with silence, with memory, with pain. Enoch did not lift his head, not at first. He traced one last word in the light, and only then did he stop. Mahway, he said, a whisper. Yet it struck the giant like thunder. You dreamed, Enoch continued, eyes still on the stone. Mahway fell to his knees. The ground did not shake. Even his weight was swallowed by that holy stillness. Yes, he answered. His voice cracked. And I remembered the flood. Enoch looked up. His eyes, they were not fire, they were not stars, they were sorrow. You remembered what has not yet come. Mahway bowed his head. There will be no ark for us, he said. No, Enoch answered. No dove to return with hope. No, no mercy. The silence hung, and then softly Enoch said, not from the sky. Mahway looked up. There is mercy, Enoch said, but not where you were born to look. He turned his hand toward the stone, and on it the light began to change. Words appeared, but not in the tongue of angels nor the speech of men. They were wounds. Each letter bled light, not white but gold tinged with mourning. They twisted not in pain but in yearning, as if they longed to be understood but feared what they carried. Mahway leaned closer. He could not read them with his mind, only with what remained of his soul. And what he saw made him tremble, a vision, not through eyes but through memory. He saw the giants, his brothers, devouring the world. Cities blackened, mothers screaming, blood in rivers, skies that roared without mercy. Mountains split, trees weeping ash, and then water, endless, cold, rising like God's forgotten wrath. He saw them all fall, drown, curse, beg, fade, and then he saw their spirits disembodied, wandering. They had no peace, no rest. They became demons, Rephaim, ghosts, whispers of ruin. They would haunt the edges of the world until the end of days. Hunger with no flesh, rage with no voice. And then Mahway saw his own face, but not falling, not drowned, not lost, kneeling before the light, not in defiance, but in grief, in repentance. And Enoch's voice returned, softer than wind, older than stars. Your kind cannot be saved. Mahway nodded, he knew. But you, Enoch said, you may be remembered. Mahway's breath caught. You may carry this tablet, Enoch continued, tracing the final word in the light. You may take it to the others. Tell them what you saw, tell them what you feared, tell them what waits beneath the sky. Mahway bowed, but not like a servant, like one who has heard the voice of truth for the first time. Enoch looked into his eyes. "This is not forgiveness," he said. "It is warning." Mahway nodded. "And you," Enoch whispered, "are the warning." The stone dimmed, the canyon sighed, and the light vanished into the giant's chest. It did not burn, it did not blind, it became memory, and Mahway stood. For the last time he looked at the man who once walked with God. Enoch was writing again, not with joy, not with sorrow, but with resolve, for he too had seen the flood. He too had heard the judgment, and he too knew the giants must fall. Mahway left the canyon, no angels sang, no earth trembled, but somewhere deep in the folds of sky a tear was caught in the wind, and it bore his name, Mahway, the giant who remembered, the warning written in sorrow, the shadow of a flood that had not yet come. But would, and still the world slept, not knowing, not listening, but now you have heard. And I ask you, if the giants wept before the flood, who weeps for them now? If the first lie was beauty, who then created the blade? Before there was blood in the soil, before man had tasted death with his own mouth, there was a name whispered in the corners of heaven, not with reverence, not with love, but with caution: Azazel. He was not the highest among the watchers. He did not lead their descent. But none among them fell with such fire. None gave so freely what should have never been touched. It was not lust that turned his gaze downward, it was pride cloaked in charity, a gleaming mercy that turned men to monsters. He came not with chains, but with gifts. While Samyaza feared the burden of sin, Azazel clothed it in gold. He descended like morning mist, silent and glittering, his steps kissed by the light of 1,000 stars. And when he walked among the daughters of men, he did not ravage them, he adorned them, painted their eyes with crushed stones, taught their fingers to weave metals into beauty, their lips to shimmer like the wings of dying birds. He taught the men to shape iron, not for harvest, for war. He taught them to kill, not with rage, but with purpose, not with cries, but with silence. For Azazel did not weep when the first blood fell on sacred ground. He watched, and he smiled. They called it progress, they called it wisdom, they called it power, but heaven called it betrayal, and the earth it began to ache. The wind changed its voice. The animals grew restless. Children cried without knowing why. Trees refused to bear fruit. The stars flickered like eyes that could no longer stay open. Azazel had set the world aflame, not with fire, but with knowing. Men knew death now. They knew envy, greed, beauty that enslaved, weapons that whispered to the hand, "Strike before you are struck." It was Azazel who taught the name of the blade. He did not mean to destroy. He meant to elevate. That was his curse. He believed. He believed that heaven had erred in hiding such truths, that if man were to rise, he must first be unshackled. He whispered in the ears of the watchers, "Why should the garden remain locked?" He whispered to the daughters of men, "Why should heaven keep its secrets from you?" He whispered to the earth itself, "I bring light." But it was not light he brought. It was brilliance without soul, flame without warmth, a mirror that showed man not who he was, but who he hungered to become. And in that mirror the giants were born, sons of fire and flesh, taller than trees, stronger than beasts. Minds sharpened like blades, hungering for dominion, knowledge, endless reach. Azazel looked upon them and called them beautiful. He called them inevitable, but the sky began to weep. Thunder cracked the silence that had watched too long, and for the first time since the foundations were laid, the heavens spoke not in blessing but in wrath. And still Azazel taught. He walked among the Nephilim, not as father but as priest. He taught them the ancient runes, the marks that twisted the earth's breath. He taught them the songs that summoned fire. He taught them the signs that bent the minds of men. He believed he was building a kingdom, a radiant dawn, a heaven below, but each lesson dug a grave. Each revelation burned a bridge between the divine and the dust. And in the shadows, the angels who had not fallen watched in silence and wept. Azazel did not see himself as fallen. He saw himself as chosen, chosen to awaken, chosen to give, chosen to burn. But fire forgets what it touches. And Azazel, though cloaked in light, was made of ruin. He knew the day would come. He saw it in the eyes of his children, not fear, hunger, not reverence, entitlement. They no longer asked for wisdom, they demanded it. And when he tried to withhold, they raised their voices against him. He, the giver of knowledge, now became its prisoner. They no longer saw him as a guide. They saw him as the gate, and gates were made to be broken. So he stood on a mountain of bones, crowned in silence, surrounded by the brilliance of his own making, and he realized he had built a throne out of knives, and it would cut him too. There is a kind of silence that is not peace, not calm, not rest, but judgment. Azazel felt it long before it reached the others. It did not descend like thunder. It crept, like the breath before the scream, like the stillness before the flood. He stood atop the high plateau, where once he had taught men to melt the veins of the earth and shape the spoils into crowns. Now that same earth rejected him. The stones pulsed with quiet defiance. The winds no longer carried his name, they spat it. He was alone. Even his students, the mighty Nephilim, no longer sought his counsel. They had surpassed him in arrogance, in violence, in blind hunger. What he had offered as sacred flame, they wielded as wildfire. Their eyes were not eyes anymore. They were furnaces. Their laughter sounded like the tearing of fabric, the unraveling of things too old to be broken. Azazel had made kings, but they ruled with no law. He had made prophets, but they spoke only of power. And he had made children, but they were not his anymore. He looked out across the valleys. Below, cities writhed with life and light, but not divine light. Torchlight, fire from forges and furnaces. Weapons glinted from every corner. Altars bled without prayer. Women bore children not with joy, but with fear. And above it all, a trembling. He could feel it. Heaven was watching, not as it once had, with delight, with longing, with love. Now it watched with clenched breath. The Creator had not spoken yet, but the silence itself was heavier than any word. It pressed upon Azazel's shoulders like stone. It choked the sky. He knew what it meant. It was not silence. It was the drawing of breath before the divine speaks. It was the gathering of storms before the judgment. He turned his face toward the stars, those ancient fires he had once mapped for men. Now they did not shimmer, they stared. He remembered the moment of descent, the oath at Mount Hermon. The pact sealed in trembling hands, 200 watchers draped in light swearing to fall together, to not turn back. They had called it freedom. He had believed it was salvation. Now only sorrow echoed. They were scattered, some hiding in caves, some drowned in their own pride, some mad, whispering into the wind. Samyaza, their once leader, had retreated into shadows, his voice never heard again. Others had tried to repent, but the heavens would not lift their heads. Azazel alone stood tall, but it was not courage, it was resignation. He knew there would be no redemption. The blade had already been forged, and in it was his name. Still, he could not quiet the burning in his bones. He had loved them, the children of men, not as curiosities, not as playthings, but truly. He had seen their potential, the flame of divinity flickering in dust. He wanted to awaken it, but he had awakened something else, something that had slept in the blood of Adam since the exile: violence, envy, pride. Azazel had not planted it, he had only watered it. And now it bloomed across the face of the world like a garden of knives. One night, as he stood in the ruins of an old grove, the same where he had first taught the forging of bronze, the sky broke open. But not with lightning, with voices, not loud, but piercing. They did not shout, they sang, not in melody, in decree. Azazel fell to his knees, not because the sound was loud, but because it made his soul remember what it had once feared and now could no longer run from. The decree was not for him alone. It was for all the watchers, judgment, bound in chains of shadow, buried beneath the mountains of earth, silenced until the end. He saw their faces flash in the sky, each one marked, each one named, not with hatred, with truth. And he saw his own face last. The stars wept fire, the wind screamed, the stones wept blood, and the decree was sealed. Azazel would fall, but not in fire, not in death, in silence. He was to be buried not in earth, but in stillness. In forgetting, in centuries of voicelessness. His name would become a warning, his memory a curse, and worst of all, his gifts would remain. The blades, the spells, the mirrors, the chains. Mankind would keep them, use them, worship them, and he would watch, chained beneath the black mountains, eyes open, mouth closed, heart burning, and no one would hear his scream. They came for him when the stars were veiled in mourning. There were no armies, no bloodshed, no cries of terror, only light. Pure, holy, yet unrelenting. It was not fire, but it scorched, not thunder, but it shook the marrow of the earth. And in the heart of that light walked those who had not fallen, angels, but not like the watchers who had descended in longing. These bore no softness, no aching hearts. They had not coveted the world below. They were shaped by obedience, clothed in silence, born of divine will, unbent and eternal. They did not speak Azazel's name. They did not need to. He rose to meet them, though he knew there was no escape. He did not run, nor weep, nor beg, for he had already been emptied by what he had made. The blade had pierced its master long before the judgment came. The air between them did not move. There was no struggle, only stillness. They bound him not with rope, not with chains, but with the word. It wrapped around him like night around a dying fire, invisible yet final. The same word that called stars into being now silenced his breath. The same word that had shaped Eden now sealed his fate. And he fell, not from a cliff, from memory. The world above would forget his face, but not his mark. The mountains opened to receive him, not with rage, but with justice. A tomb carved not by hands, but by decree. Deep beneath the surface, deeper than light, deeper than time, they placed him where echoes die, where no prayer can reach. And there, beneath the black stone, Azazel waited. He could not speak, he could not move, but he could feel. And that was the punishment. He felt every war waged with a blade he had taught men to shape. He felt every chain fastened with a metal he had taught them to melt. He felt every cry of a child ornamented with vanity he once praised. He felt the rise of kingdoms built on his lessons and their fall. He felt the sorrow of the world and the silence of heaven. He screamed not with voice but with being, and the mountains held it in. Every 1,000 years, a crack would form in the stone. Whisper might escape, a tremor, a nightmare, a possession, a war, and they would say Azazel stirs, but no one truly knew what it meant to be forgotten by the one who once called you servant. No one knew what it meant to burn forever, not in flame, but in memory. He had loved mankind. That was the most damning truth. He had loved them too much, loved them past the line heaven had drawn, loved them until he gave them what they were never meant to hold, and now he held what no one could bear. He became the silence after the scream, the exile within the exile, and the blade he named still glimmers in men's hands, still spills blood in his name though they no longer remember it, still whispers not words but hunger, still teaches in every empire that rises on conquest, still binds in every heart that worships power disguised as beauty, still waits, and in the cracks of the world he waits too. Azazel, the gift giver. Azazel, the unspoken. Azazel, the one who loved too far and fell beyond forgetting. But I must ask you now, if the silence can carry pain, how many screams lie beneath the earth unheard? If the stars were chained, would you still call them light? There is a place beneath the skin of the earth where even shadows cannot go, not for fear, for reverence. A place not spoken of in the scriptures of men, nor etched into the bones of prophets, yet it exists, as sure as breath, as certain as the judgment that carved it. The mountain is nameless now, not because it was never named, but because the name has been erased, buried by God himself, covered in such silence that even the jinn walk wide around its base. Even the winds forget their songs when they pass over it, and yet beneath its belly something breathes, not living, but bound, not dead, but silenced. This was the place chosen, not by angels, not by demons, but by the decree that shattered the watchers. For their rebellion they were not slain. That would have been mercy. No, they were given the punishment of the ancient ones, to be buried alive in the darkness of time, sealed in prisons not made of stone but of divine will. They do not sleep. They do not age. They remember, each one. 198 names not known on earth anymore but still held in heaven, burned into the stars like scars. They lie in chains, but these are not the chains of metal. These are the chains of remembrance, of regret, of isolation. Each watcher is sealed in his own hollow, deeper than any cave, blacker than any pit. There is no sound, no taste, no air, only memory, and it is this that breaks them. For they remember what it felt like to fly. They remember what it meant to stand before the throne, untainted, radiant, beloved. They remember the wind of heaven on their faces. They remember the first moment they beheld the daughters of Adam and how something eternal within them trembled. They remember their descent, the laughter, the vows, the glorious defiance. And now all they have is silence. There is no fire here, no flame to burn away the shame. Only stillness stretched across millennia, carved into the very walls of their prison like breath held too long. And above them a gate, invisible, immutable, guarded not by sword but by decree. Only one can open it, and he does not forget. The watchers cry out not with mouths, for those have been sealed, but with their very essence. Their sorrow rises like smoke through the cracks of the world. It is why the earth sometimes groans. It is why you dream of falling. It is why the sea sometimes churns with no wind. These are echoes of the chained. The world tries to forget them, but the earth remembers. The soil does not forgive. There is one among them whose chains are heavier than the rest. Samyaza, the first voice, the one who stood upon Mount Hermon and called his brethren to oath. He does not speak anymore. He does not cry out. He only watches, even in blindness. And the others feel his sorrow more than their own, for they know what he gave up. He was not cruel. He did not seek power. He was led by longing, a longing too deep to silence, and now it silences him. They feel his regret like a tide. Some have tried to tear themselves from the chains, not out of hope, but madness. They have clawed at the walls, though there is nothing to scratch. They have tried to forget, but the punishment was written in memory itself. You cannot forget what is part of you. And so they wait, not for rescue, but for the end, the day of return. The day when the chains shall be lifted, not in mercy, but in final judgment. They will rise then, not as angels, not as gods, not as giants, but as warnings, as echoes made flesh, as proof that even stars can fall and still burn. But for now they are beneath us, right now still, listening, remembering, and you walk above them every day. You build your cities upon their sorrow. You light your candles upon their bones. You tell stories of angels, never knowing the ones who wait below. And I ask you now, if you could hear their cries in the silence of night, would you call them evil or broken? There are moments in time when the veil grows thin, when the mountains groan and the seas pull back, when the air thickens and silence deepens and the souls of men feel watched, not by the living, not by the dead, but by those who wait beneath. Their names are not etched in stone. The earth dares not hold them, yet they remain not as stories but as wounds that never closed. Samyaza, Arakelba, Ramiel, Cockabeel. These were once names that echoed in the corridors of heaven, bright, sharp, brilliant. Now they cling to the undersides of dreams, leaking through nightmares like oil through cloth. Their memories rise with the moon, pressing against the edge of the veil, not to break through, but to be known. Their prisons are not of flesh. They are sculpted from the judgment of the divine, a substance heavier than metal, darker than night, made of the very silence that preceded the first light. Chains forged from command, sealed with the word. And the word does not falter. Each chain is a memory, each shackle a lesson unlearned. Each moment they breathe in that stillness is a reminder. Not all who fall are consumed, some are preserved to remember. And still they whisper. Though their tongues are bound, their hearts bleed thought. They do not conspire, they mourn. They speak not of vengeance, but of what once was. They remember the moment they beheld Adam fashioned from earth, kissed by breath, so small, so fleeting, and yet chosen for mercy, chosen for nearness, chosen to fall and rise again. The watchers did not understand, not then. They were eternal, brilliant, fire without flaw. Why should love choose clay? Why should dust inherit light? They looked down upon the daughters of men and saw a beauty that pierced through eternity. Not lust as men understand it, but ache. The ache of being made to serve yet never to taste, so they fell. And in that falling they made giants, not by intention, by consequence. The Nephilim were not born out of love. They were born out of imbalance, out of the union of realms that were never meant to meet. And the world bent beneath them. When the watchers were taken, their children howled. They shook the trees, split the sky with cries that rose into storms. They did not understand abandonment. They had never tasted restraint. They searched for their fathers. They dug into the earth. They clawed at the skies. They built altars of bone and ash, calling out for the return of the ones who made them. But silence answered. Because the watchers had been buried in the womb of the earth, their eyes sealed, their voices drowned, their arms bound to memory. And so the giants turned bitter, not merely violent, lost. They roamed without purpose. They devoured to feel full. They ruled to feel real. They raged to silence the echoes of dreams they did not understand. And when they too began to fall, the watchers felt every death. Each son slain, each daughter hunted, each name erased. The pain of it crept through their chains like frost through roots. But they were not permitted to weep. Tears are for the forgiven, and they had chosen the path beyond return. Samyaza did not cry out. He listened to the stillness between the screams, to the weight of what he had asked for, what he had spoken into being. His brothers were not all silent. Some wept in madness, calling out to the heavens that no longer heard them. Some still prayed, not for freedom, but for a final end. Some sang old songs, hymns once sung beside rivers of light, now laced with grief, unraveling into dirges. But Samyaza only listened, and it is said that one day a whisper reached him, faint, fragile, like a child's breath caught between sobs, not from beneath, from above. A descendant of man, one who had heard the old tales, one who, in fear, spoke the forbidden name, Samyaza. And in that moment, in the depths of earth where no wind stirs, where no angels fly, where even the shadows dare not remain, a single chain trembled. Not in defiance, in remembrance, because the name had not been erased, not fully. It lived in fear, yes, but it lived. And though Samyaza did not stir the mountainside, not in mercy, but in warning, because to remember is to awaken. And the chains, though unbreakable, were made to hold silence, not memory, not names. And now the names are returning, one by one, in whispers, in ruins, in dreams. And so I ask you now, if you knew they could hear you beneath your feet, what would you say? There are places in this world where the wind does not blow, though the trees still bend, where the stones seem older than time, but not with age, with memory. One such place stands hidden beneath the cradle of ancient mountains, known only to the earth and the one who shaped it. There, buried deeper than death, lie the watchers, not asleep, not awake, but enduring. Above them the soil is sacred, not because it was blessed, but because it bears the weight of justice. Grass does not grow there. Rain avoids it. The stars above blink slower, as though burdened with what lies below. And the chains, oh the chains, they are not made of anything men can touch. They are woven from decree, sealed in light, made from the sorrow of the throne. They do not rust. They do not loosen. They are not metal. They are judgment. Each watcher lies in his own hollow. Some still remember their songs. Others have forgotten the shape of light. Most no longer dream. Dreaming, after all, is a grace. But every 1,000 years, when the veil between realms thins, when the prayers of mankind grow too faint, when blood touches the dust too often, something shifts. A hum begins, so quiet that even the jinn flee from it. It is not speech. It is not rebellion. It is memory. The kind of memory that aches in the spine of the world. The kind that makes rivers dry and the moon lose its color. And when it happens, the chains groan, not in weakness, in warning, because even judgment waits. There is a time written in the hidden tablets, not held in mosques, not preserved in caves, but guarded in the hall of measures beyond the seventh sky. There the moment is recorded, when the chains will open, not out of mercy, but because justice must be complete. The watchers will rise, not to be freed, but to be seen. so that all generations who laughed at the ancient things, who mocked the warnings, who turned myth into metaphor, might behold what was buried in stone for their sake. And they will not come with swords, they will not need to. Their very presence will shake the bones of men. The sky will not split, it will kneel. The mountains will not crack, they will weep. And their eyes, those ancient, fallen eyes, will hold no hatred, only the reflection of what man has become. For though the watchers were buried, their gifts were not. Mankind still wears the metals, still draws the blades, still paints their faces and calls it glory, still kills in silence and calls it wisdom. The inheritance remains. The chains held the fathers, but not the children. And what then shall we say? When they rise again, not to rule, not to beg, but to remind, what shall we say? When the ground trembles and the stars flicker in recognition, and the veil pulls back just for a moment. What shall we say? The prophets knew. Enoch wrote of it, though the pages were torn away. The flood was not the end, it was the warning. It was the water before the fire, it was mercy before the last silence. And now we live in the age of forgetting, but forgetting does not erase. The chains beneath the mountain remain, not rusted, not broken, not sleeping, just waiting. And as long as they wait, the earth remembers. So walk gently, speak truthfully. And when you hear the wind grow still on a day it should be wild, listen. And if all you hear is silence, remember this, sometimes silence is not peace, it is the sound of something listening. What do you write when no one is left to read? Long before the flood swallowed the bones of the earth, before angels were chained and giants forgot, there was a man who wrote in silence, not with ink, not on paper, but with fire, with breath, with the trembling of creation still echoing in his bones. His name was Enoch, and he did not write to be remembered. He wrote because God commanded him to. He wrote because heaven whispered truths too vast for tongues, too sacred for song, too heavy for dreams. And so he wrote, not as a scholar nor a scribe, but as one chosen to bear memory. He walked alone, not out of pride, but because no one else could follow. The angels once called him the one who listens twice. Men called him mad, but the earth knew him. The wind bowed to him, and the stars aligned to watch his path. For Enoch walked in both realms, the dust and the divine. He moved among angels as one of them, yet bore the weight of flesh. His eyes did not burn, but they saw what should not be seen. And his hands they wrote, not on scrolls that could rot or tear. He carved his words into stone that had never known chisel, into mountains that bled light, into silence itself. Each word was a wound, a prophecy, a record. But there was one kind of writing more sacred than all, the dream tablets. They were not of this world. They were not carried in hand nor buried in sand. They floated, yes, suspended in the air, formed of radiant stone that pulsed with memory, shaped not by hammer but by obedience. They bore no letters, only the marks of visions, dreams given by the Most High, seen through eyes that had wept with angels. And when Enoch touched them, they burned not his skin but his soul, because these were not his words. They were God's warnings. Each tablet held a vision of what was, of what is, of what must come. One spoke of the flood long before the clouds even gathered. One spoke of the fall, of angels weeping, of chains binding glory in silence. One told of the giants, of their hunger, their pride, their end. But one tablet, one Enoch dared not show to any living soul. It bore no dream, only a reflection. When Enoch gazed into it, he did not see symbols. He saw himself not as he was, but as he would be if he disobeyed. A silence deeper than judgment. A forgetting darker than fire. And so he obeyed. He wrote even when his hands bled, even when his soul grew weary. He wrote what the angels revealed, what the stars whispered, what the divine etched into the space behind breath. And then he vanished, not by death, but by invitation. God took him not to end him, but to lift him beyond the veil. And in the place he left behind, they found only the tablets, hovering still, untouched by time, unread by most, but waiting. For the ones who still remember how to listen, Mahway found one. You remember the giant born of Samyaza, cursed by birth, broken by vision. He brought back a dream, a piece of Enoch's memory carried not in his hand but in his soul. and he returned to his brothers with truth. But the Nephilim did not rejoice. They feared, not because of what was said, but because they felt it, the weight, the sorrow, the end written into the beginning. The dream tablet burned when Mahway carried it, because it was not meant for giants. It was meant for mankind, for you, and now you hear it. The story you were never supposed to find, not in books, not in temples, but in the stillness between heartbeats. The tablets remain buried in the folds of creation, hidden in caves no map can draw, guarded not by sword but by forgetting. And yet they wait. They do not age, they do not fade, because truth, once written by God's will, cannot die. It only waits to be remembered. They say the dream tablets glow when lies are spoken nearby, not as a warning, as grief, because they do not rage, they remember. And remembrance in the language of the divine is not passive, it is alive. It is a river beneath all things, and when that river stirs, the sky feels it, the bones feel it, even the wind changes direction. Mahway had carried only a fragment, and still it nearly broke him. When he brought it to his kin, the giants who ruled over men like gods of ruin, they recoiled. Not because they feared the words, but because they knew them. Deep beneath their laughter, beyond their arrogance and power, they had always known. That judgment was not a myth. That memory could not be drowned. That even the mountains which bore their weight would one day rise against them. And when Mahway spoke, the earth seemed to grow quiet. He did not raise his voice. He did not threat, he simply remembered aloud. He told them what Enoch had shown, of a flood with no edges, of skies torn open, of voices above the clouds crying not in anger but in mourning, of chains descending like shadows made of sorrow, of names called aloud not in hatred but in finality, and of silence, vast, crushing, eternal. The silence that comes when even heaven turns away. Some giants laughed, the foolish ones. Others fell into themselves, silent, disturbed not by punishment but by recognition, because the dream tablet had shown them their own reflection, not who they thought they were, but what they had become. And then Mahway told them what he saw at the end of the dream. A man, small, mortal, dust-bound, but his face shone with light, not fire, faith. He stood alone on a mountain, arms raised to the sky while the waters rose beneath him. He did not cry out for rescue, he prayed. Not to be spared, but to be remembered. That was Noah, the one whom the dream tablets had spoken of, the last echo before the flood, the seed of something the watchers could never be, obedient, hidden, chosen not for greatness but for listening. And when Mahway said his name, a tremor passed through the gathering of giants, because in all their might they were not named, but this man was, this child of clay, this weeper, this believer, he had been marked. And they, for all their fire, for all their wisdom, were not. They were written in the record of ruin, but Noah was written in the memory of mercy. The difference was not strength, it was humility. The dream tablets burned brighter when his name was spoken, and even the giants in their pride could feel it. Some fled, thinking they could outrun the end. Some sank into madness, whispering prayers to gods who no longer listened. Some turned violent, believing that if the world would end, they would end it first. But a few, a precious, tormented few, wept, not for themselves, for what they could have been. Mahway remained with them, not as king, as memory. He carried the tablet like one carries a wound. He did not preach. He did not demand. He only remembered. And the memory was enough to change the air around him, but it was not enough to stop what was coming. Enoch had written what was decreed, and the dream tablets did not lie. The flood was already stirring. The skies were already heavy. The silence was already growing. Mahway did not seek escape. He sought Enoch, again, not for salvation, for understanding. Why, he asked, would God show the truth to those who could not be saved? Why would the tablets be given to the cursed? Why would remembrance be placed in the hands of the doomed? And the answer did not come in thunder. It came in stillness, in a wind that passed over his face like the breath of something ancient. And in that silence he understood. The dream tablets were not given to change fate. They were given so it would not be forgotten, because judgment is not cruel, oblivion is. And in the mercy of remembrance, even the fallen may find purpose, not to rise, but to witness, to bear truth, to testify to the light they turned away from, to be in the end not saved, but sacred echoes. The skies were not yet open, the flood had not yet begun, but the wind carried a new kind of hush, not of sleep, but of waiting. And in the high places where the veil between realms thinned to a breath, Enoch stood again. He had returned not by descent, but by command, not to warn, to write. The dream tablets had grown heavier, not in weight, in sorrow. He could feel the ache in the stone, the trembling in the silence. He did not need a voice to know what must be done. God does not shout when he writes history. He whispers, and Enoch listened. His hands no longer trembled. They had been steadied by awe, by grief, by the knowledge that every letter carved into these sacred tablets would remain long after the stars themselves had grown dim. He did not weep. There were no tears left, not for the giants, not for the watchers, not even for himself. He wept for the earth, for its innocence once wrapped in Eden's breeze, now choked by blood and smoke, for the animals who cowered from giants who once played with them, for the mountains cracked by footsteps too large for mercy, for the sky which could no longer bear to look down. He wrote of the Nephilim. He wrote of their hunger, their greatness, their ruin. He wrote of Mahway not as monster, but as memory. He wrote of Azazel bound, burning, watching. He wrote of Samyaza broken, buried, listening. He wrote of every name heaven had marked. But the last tablet he wrote was not for angels. It was for dust, for the line of Adam, for the sons and daughters who would be born after the water, who would forget, who would rebuild, who would once again dig into the bones of the past and find the glint of forbidden things. He wrote not to stop them, but to remind them that the flood was not the end. It was the mercy before the fire. He carved warnings into the heart of the stone, words that no language could fully hold, truths too sharp for comfort, too holy for argument. And when the last mark was written, he stood. He did not look back. The tablets would be hidden, some buried in mountains, some swallowed by rivers, some scattered by angels into places no map could trace, and a few, a precious few, would float, invisible to the eyes of the proud, yet burning in the hearts of those who remember. And it is said that even now, in the still hours of the night, when the soul quiets and the air grows still, one may feel them, not see, not touch, but feel a presence, a waiting, a truth that aches like an old scar. You may be walking above one now, or perhaps you carry one inside you. Not in stone, in memory, a memory not of your own past, but of the world, of what it once was, of what it forgot, of what it must remember before the silence returns. And in the last line Enoch carved, he did not speak of doom. He spoke of the reader, the listener, the one who would awaken from the comfort of forgetting and ask, "What have we done with the fire we were given?" He carved it not in fear, but in hope, and he left, not into shadow, into light. The tablets remain. And they do not fade, they wait, for the one who listens twice, as Enoch did, as you do now. So I ask you, if you found a tablet that showed the end, would you still read it to the world? Where do giants go when the world no longer dreams of them? They did not all die. The flood came, yes, roaring like the voice of 1,000 forgotten prayers, sweeping across valleys and mountains, drowning even the arrogance of stars reflected in water. It devoured the cities of men, the temples of stone, the altars built from bone and pride. It swallowed the screams of the wicked and the innocent alike. And yet, not all the Nephilim perished. Some were slain before the rain began, hunted by men who had glimpsed the tablets, who had heard whispers in the dark and feared what their children would become. Others were betrayed by their own giants, turning against giants in despair, devouring one another like wolves in a burning den. But a few remained. Not alive, not dead, sleeping, buried beneath the earth, hidden in the hollows of mountains, sealed behind doors that no hand of man or angel would willingly open. Their breath slowed, their eyes closed, their bones hardened like stone, and the world, thinking them gone, exhaled. But the Nephilim do not pass as men do. They were not born of dust, but of mingled glory. Their death is never final. Their dreams do not forget. In lands now swallowed by desert wind, there are ruins that cry out in silence. Stone faces eroded by time, doorways that lead nowhere, carvings too deep to be made by any mortal hand. Beneath these places, giants sleep, and they dream, not of paradise, not of heaven. They dream of what they lost, not because it was stolen, but because they destroyed it. They dream of fire that once obeyed them, of stars that once named them, of the sound of angelic laughter before it was silenced by judgment. Their dreams are not visions, they are storms, and the land above them feels it. The soil above their tombs grows wild, untamed. The animals shun it. Children cry near it. Night lingers longer where they lie, because even in sleep the Nephilim remember. And remembrance is power. Some say they will never wake, that the flood was their end, that God's mercy was also final. Others say they were spared, not in kindness, in warning, that their slumber is a sign not of peace but of pause. That when the veil between worlds is stretched too thin, when men return to the ancient arts, when the blood of pride once again stains the dust, then they will stir, slowly, quietly, like a storm forming beneath calm seas. You will not hear their footsteps. You will feel them in your spine, in your dreams, in the trembling of the wind that suddenly forgets its path. The watchers are bound, but the Nephilim were never judged by heaven. They were the consequence, the fruit, and fruit bears seed. It is written not in your books, not in your monuments, but in the bones of the world, that the giants will rise again, not to rule, to witness, to remind, and perhaps to judge. Their sleep is not escape, it is not sanctuary, it is sorrow. And though their eyes are closed, their hearts still burn, not with hatred, with memory, of a time when the world was theirs, when men bowed and trembled, when even angels wept for what had been made. And they wonder, when they rise, will they be seen as monsters or as mirrors? And I ask you, if a giant opened his eyes tomorrow, would you run or would you listen? There are places in the earth where breath does not belong. Caverns untouched by time, far beneath the roots of the oldest trees, below even the forgotten rivers that once sang through Eden's broken gate. In these sacred hollows the Nephilim sleep. And when the flood came, these places did not flood. They closed, sealed not by stone but by silence. And it is said that angels were sent not to slay but to seal. Not all giants were wicked in the end. Some, weary from the bloodshed, had knelt before heaven's name, not in rebellion but in grief. Their prayers were not accepted, but neither were they forgot. For even in wrath the Most High writes mercy into the cracks of judgment. The Nephilim who slept did not ask to live. They asked not to be erased, and so they were not. They were laid down in the cradles of the deep, not preserved. Remembered, and their memory became stone. Their hearts still beat, not quickly, not loudly, just enough to be known by the soil above. When rains fall too heavily, when rivers shift their course, when mountains echo without cause, it is said the giants are turning in their sleep. Their dreams are vast, not bound by years nor limited by body. They roam the old days, the age before the flood, when they danced upon the backs of valleys, when men trembled and angels wept. But they do not smile in their sleep. They do not laugh. They do not speak, because even in dreams they know they are no longer welcome. The world they remember has drowned. The names they once wore like crowns are now curses on the lips of the living. Children are warned of them. Fathers build their homes far from the mountains that hold their bones. Mothers whisper prayers when the wind shifts suddenly. And the giants, though they do not wake, they hear, they feel, and some of them grieve. There is one whose tomb lies beneath a broken desert, beneath sand that never settles. His name was Amma. He once lifted the sun-blinded cities with a single hand. His voice made walls tremble. His thoughts were faster than thunder, and yet in the end he chose silence. He fled before the flood came, not to hide but to kneel. He did not beg for life, he begged for forgiveness. No answer came, but his tears did not vanish. The earth drank them, and now he sleeps. But his tomb, they say, hums when the stars turn. Not loudly, just enough to unsettle the birds above, just enough to draw dreams from the minds of shepherds who sleep nearby. Amma dreams not of conquest. He dreams of the day he first opened his eyes and beheld a flower in his mother's hand. It was small, yellow. It did not speak, but it did not fear him. It leaned toward him, and he smiled. Now in sleep he sees that flower again, but its petals are on fire, and still. He does not look away, because even in fire there is truth. Another giant sleeps beneath a mountain that once split with his cry. Her name is Matia, born of a watcher whose name has long since vanished from heaven's list. She was swift, unseen by men until it was too late, but her hands healed as easily as they harmed. She crafted herbs into poultices, taught birds to speak, soothed children with a song no one remembers. But when the Nephilim turned violent, she too was drawn in, not by desire, by loyalty. And when the blood flowed too thick, she vanished into the mountains and lay upon the cold stone, weeping until the angels came. They did not raise their blades. They closed her eyes with light, and now she sleeps. Her dreams are rivers. They flow through the minds of poets and prophets. They birth songs no one claims to have written, and still they flow. These giants, Amma, Matia, and others whose names we dare not speak, do not sleep in peace. They sleep in penance. Because though they were not born of sin, they carried it, inherited it, breathed it in, and for a time they called it glory. Now in the hollow of the deep they remember what glory cost. They remember the fire they could not put out, the children they could not save, the blood they could not wash from their hands. And though the flood passed above them, their tears have never dried. The world may think them gone, but the earth has not forgotten. And when it stirs in strange ways, when your heart beats harder near certain hills, when dreams press on your chest like sorrow made heavy, you may be walking over them. And I ask you, if they opened their eyes and spoke your name, would you answer? There are winds that carry names, not the names men give each other, fleeting, worn thin by repetition, but names that were never spoken aloud, only carved in the secret heart of the world, where angels once walked barefoot across silence. These names belong to the Nephilim who sleep, and they are not forgotten, not by the sky, not by the stars, not by the dust that still remembers the weight of their steps. In the east, where the sun strikes first and the mountains cast long shadows before the world has fully woken, there lies a valley. It is not marked on any map. No road leads to it. The wind there changes without cause, and the soil hums if touched. They say a giant sleeps beneath it, one whose name is forbidden, because to speak it is to stir grief too vast for a single heart to carry. He was not cruel, he was not kind, he was searching. He wandered the earth not as a conqueror, but as one cursed to look for something he had never known. They say he sought his father, a watcher who had long since vanished into chains and shadow. And in that search he grew quiet. He refused the violence of his kin. He walked barefoot so the earth would not fear him. And when he could not find what he was made from, he lay down, and the wind covered him. The dust wrapped around him like a womb, and he slept, not out of weariness but out of sorrow. Above him the years passed. Kingdoms rose, fell, and forgot their gods. Languages changed. The stars themselves shifted places, but the valley did not change. Even now, if you stand there, if you breathe and listen and close your eyes, you may hear a sound like thunder held beneath the skin of the world. That is his breath, still slow, still deep, still waiting. But for what? Some say he sleeps in defiance, that when the veil is torn and the watchers are unchained, he will rise and remind the world of what it cast away. Others say he sleeps in hope, that he still dreams of a voice calling him home, a voice that never came. A voice that said once, "You were not meant to be." The giants who sleep do not dream of glory, they dream of silence. They dream of things not spoken, of the moments between the verses, of the look in the eyes of the prophets who saw them and turned away, not in fear but in pity. They dream of what they could have been had the watchers stayed above, had the world not opened its arms to ruin, had beauty not been mistaken for permission. They dream of the wind before it changed. And that is why the world is not free of them, because they did not come only to destroy, they came to teach. And though their teachings twisted in the hands of men, the memory of them lingers, in ruins, in lullabies that mention beings tall as trees who once wept like children, in carved faces hidden beneath moss staring up at a sky they cannot reach, in the stories told by the old not with words but with eyes. The Nephilim sleep, but sleep is not the end. Sleep is pause. Sleep is mercy stretched out across centuries. Sleep is the moment before memory becomes awakening. And when the seals grow thin, when the world, once again, begins to worship power without restraint, knowledge without reverence, beauty without humility, when men make giants of themselves, then the ground will stir. Not all at once, but breath by breath. A tomb will crack, a shadow will move, a wind will forget where it's going, and someone, perhaps a child, perhaps a prophet, will hear it, a single name not shouted, whispered from beneath the earth. And in that whisper the world will remember, so tread lightly. The dirt you walk may be sacred or sleeping or both. And I ask you, if one of them returned and asked what you have made of their world, could you answer? If a flame never dies, is it still called light, or does it become longing? Before the flood, before the giants fell, before the watchers were bound beneath the bones of the earth, there was a fire that wandered. It did not consume. It did not flicker. It did not warm. It was not made for the hearth, nor born in the forge. It was a fire placed upon the earth by the will of the Most High, not to destroy, but to remember. Its name was never spoken. It was not needed. It was the fire of presence. The fire that once lived between the wings of angels. The fire that trembled atop Sinai long before Moses had breath. The fire that does not burn because its purpose is not judgment. It is witnessing. And it saw everything. It hovered above the garden after Adam's exile. It followed the first son who spilled blood and marked the earth with sorrow. It stood among the watchers the day they descended, silent and unseen, glowing behind the veil. And when they sinned, when the pact was made, when the stars dimmed in mourning, the fire remained. It did not speak. It did not strike. It only watched. As they taught men the language of stars, as they shaped blades from sacred ores, as they painted their brides with colors stolen from heaven, as they called themselves gods, the fire drifted. It passed through cities built too tall. It stood beside altars slick with blood. It wept near children who no longer knew innocence, and it never left. It followed the Nephilim, those terrible sons of glory and ruin. It walked behind them as they conquered. It stood beside them when they wept. It whispered through their dreams, not in words, but in heat that could not be explained. And still it never consumed, because that fire was not punishment, it was memory. And to remember in the divine language is to bear witness, to carry the echo of what was through the silence of what is, to be the bridge between mercy and consequence. Mahway saw it once. When he stood upon a ridge far from his kin, waiting for the stars to answer a question he could not speak, the fire came. It did not approach him, it was already there. It shimmered at the edge of his vision, soft, steady, ancient. He turned, and though it made no sound, he heard it, not with ears, with ache. It was not fear, it was the ache of being seen, truly seen, not as a monster, not as a mistake, but as a sorrow too old to bury. The fire pulsed once, and in that pulse Mahway remembered. Not his conquests, not his lineage, not even Enoch's dream. He remembered his mother's breath. The moment she first held him, the fear in her eyes, the wonder, the silence, the touch of an angel's memory flickering behind her tears. He remembered what it was to be held not in arms but in awe. And then the fire faded, not into smoke, into stillness. And Mahway fell to his knees because he understood. The fire was not sent to warn him, it was sent to hold his memory. To keep the light from dying. It would remain, long after he was gone, long after his bones turned to stone, long after the flood. It would wait for the next generation, for the children who would forget, for the prophets who would be silenced, for the storytellers who would not be believed, for the last voice trembling beneath the stars, daring to ask, did they truly walk among us? And to that voice the fire will answer, not in speech, in presence, in warmth that does not burn, in stillness that does not flee. Because though the angels fell and the giants slept and the tablets scattered, the fire remains, watching, waiting, witnessing, and perhaps you have seen it too, in the corner of your eye where the candle does not flicker, in a dream that left you warm though no sun had risen, in the space between breaths when you remembered something you were never told. That is the fire, and it does not forget. The fire has no shadow, it needs none. For it was born before darkness was called by name, before time was divided between night and light, before angels first bowed in reverence to the command, be. It moves as memory does, unseen but known. It is neither bound by direction nor trapped by place. It is not sent, it arrives. And when it does not announce itself with fanfare or storm. It simply is. And when it is, the soul trembles, not with fear, with recognition. This fire once stood before Iblis when he refused the command to bow. It did not speak, but it bore witness. It marked that moment. And when the heavens fell silent, it remained behind to remember. It passed over the ark as the waters rose. Noah saw its shimmer but did not ask. He knew. Some things are not to be named. Some truths are to be bowed before. It stood beside the body of Habil, the first slain, not to avenge but to remember. And it followed the bloodline of Adam through every generation, bearing the weight of memory so that the world would not forget what it costs to be loved by God and still choose to fall. When the Watchers fell, it did not flee. When the Nephilim were born, it did not blink. When Azazel taught the forging of weapons, it stood at the edge of the flame, unseen, untouched, unburning. It did not interfere, it recorded. For there are two kinds of knowledge in this world, the kind that acts and the kind that remembers. The fire was made for the second, and that is why it still remains, because memory to the divine is not a library of facts. It is a sacred oath, an echo that must be carried until it finds a voice strong enough to speak it again. A whisper that waits not for understanding but for reverence. And so it wandered, to places men no longer walk, to ruins swallowed by oceans, to the ashes of cities that burned before names were born. And it watched. It watched a child draw a circle in the dust and hum a melody she could not have known, a song the Nephilim once sang before they turned to conquest. It watched an old man whisper to the stones beneath his house, as if the walls still heard. It watched a dreamer write symbols on paper, never having learned the script, a script once carved into the mountains by the first of the Watchers. It watched and it remembered, not to punish, to preserve, because this world forgets. It forgets easily. It forgets that the stars once wept, that the sky once turned away in sorrow, that the wind once carried names too heavy for human breath. It forgets that beauty has a price and knowledge carries blood in its shadow. But the fire does not forget. It glows softly beneath the cracks of the world. It flickers in the dust between pages of old books never read aloud. It pulses in caves where no fire was ever lit. It glimmers behind the eyes of children who dream of beings they should not know. And every 1,000 years, when the veil thins, when man grows bold again, taming the earth as if it were his slave, splitting the heavens with towers, forging unity without humility, the fire grows brighter, not to stop them, but to remember what comes next. It is not judgment, it is not rage. It is the warmth that lingers after the light has fled. The reminder that before the first blade there was a whisper, before the flood there was a warning, before the end there was always a witness. And you who are listening now in the stillness between stars and sleep, perhaps you have seen it. Perhaps it has stood behind you once, not with heat, but with presence. Perhaps it pressed against your skin when you touched something ancient, when you looked too long into the eyes of a statue that should not have existed, when you dreamed of a city you've never walked but remembered just the same. That was the fire. It does not explain, it does not teach, it only waits, because someone must carry the memory, not as burden, as blessing. The blessing of knowing that truth never dies. It only finds new voices, new hearts, new keepers. So if you feel it now, that quiet, that warmth behind your breath, know this: you are not alone. You have entered the space where memory lives, where fire burns and yet does not destroy, where the past is not gone, only watching. And if you close your eyes and let your heart grow still, you may hear it whisper, "I remember you." There was once a prophet who never spoke aloud the name of the fire, not because he did not know it, but because some names were not made for tongues, only for silence, only for awe. He walked across a plain of broken stones where the wind moved in circles not lost but reverent. And there, in a hollow carved not by hands but by memory, the fire waited. He did not approach. He did not kneel. He closed his eyes and wept, because the fire was older than grief, and in its warmth he remembered every sorrow not yet spoken, the children not born, the cities not built, the wars not waged, and the ones that would be. And still the fire did not flicker. It only listened, for that is its task. It listens when no one else can bear to. It holds the sounds that would break the heart of the world, the screams of the fallen watchers as the chains closed around their spirits, the trembling breath of the giants as the flood rose around them, the whispered names carved into the sides of mountains, now buried by sand and time, the sobs of mothers who knew their sons were no longer human, the final prayer of a man who had written the dreams of God into tablets no one would ever read. The fire listened to it all, and it does still. You may have passed it once, not as a flame, but as a hush that fell over you in a place that should have been loud, as a warmth that settled behind your ribs without warning, then vanished as though it had never been. You may have heard its voice in the space between two thoughts when your breath caught and the world paused and everything felt older. It was there. It always is, because the fire is not only witness, it is promise. It is the promise that nothing sacred is ever truly lost, that no act of love, however crushed by the weight of history, ever fades, that no truth once spoken by the divine can be erased by flood or flame or forgetfulness, that even if the world falls again and the giants rise and the watchers stir and the skies burn, this fire will remain, waiting for the one who remembers, waiting for the soul who kneels not in fear but in reverence, waiting for the day someone will ask, "What still burns when the world turns to ash?" And the answer will be this fire, the one that hovered before Eden closed, the one that drifted behind Enoch as he walked into heaven, the one that glowed in Mahway's dream, the one that sings softly even now beneath the noise of all things, not in rage, not in demand, only in memory. You cannot find it, but it may find you. When your soul grows quiet enough, when your pride has worn thin, when your heart has become again like dust, soft enough to feel the light, and if it does, do not ask for proof, do not beg for signs, simply sit and listen. Let the warmth enter your bones, let the silence speak, let the memory rise, and when it does, you will know. This fire does not come to destroy. It comes to remind you that you are not forgotten, you never were, and neither were they. So I ask you now, if the last thing to survive the end of all things is fire, will it find you faithful? If the sky could be written upon, would we know how to read it? Long before men shaped parchment from reeds, before prophets wrote by candlelight and kings sealed laws with rings of iron, there was a scroll, not of paper, not of skin, but of dust and stars. It stretched across the firmament, unseen by eyes but never hidden. It was the first scripture not spoken aloud but written into the order of things, woven into the orbits of moons, inscribed in the movements of clouds, etched upon the breath between sunrise and dusk. It was not made by angels. It was not made by men. It was made by decree, and it is still unrolling, not horizontally like the scrolls of old, but downward toward earth. The wise among the ancients knew of it. Not by name, it has none, but by presence. They saw it in dreams, felt it in the wind that arrived before storms, heard its edges whispering in the space between the call of the owl and the silence of the fox. It is a record, but not only of what has been, of what must be, of what already is in a place outside of time, where stories are not told in sequence but in stillness. The watchers once beheld it. In the high heavens before their descent, they stood in silence as it passed above them. It bore no words, only light, only motion, but they understood because it was not meant to be read with eyes, it was meant to be felt with longing. And that is what pierced them. That is what made their feet tremble upon the summit of Mount Hermon, not rebellion, but remembrance. They remembered what they had seen in the scroll of the heavens, and they desired it, not as angels, but as something else, as fathers, as creators, as gods. And so they fell chasing the shape of something they once saw written in the stars, now burning like hunger in their chests. But the scroll did not follow them. It remained above, unrolling still. And when they looked up from the earth, they could no longer read it. The light had changed. The rhythm had shifted. They had stepped out of its story. And so they began writing their own, with blood, with stone, with children who bore the weight of heaven's memory in bodies not meant to carry such light. The Nephilim were not errors. They were additions, lines written into the margin of a holy story but never meant to remain. The scroll did not rage. It did not correct. It simply turned. And a new page began. This one bore a name, not of an angel, not of a giant, but of a man, Noah. A name so small it could be missed between the stars. A name made of soft syllables and long silence. A name that did not conquer. A name that waited. And the scroll turned again. And again. And each time it turned, the light shifted upon the earth. Prophets were born, not as kings, as lamplighters, each one sent with a fragment of that scroll embedded in their soul, not visible, not even known to them in full, but pulsing, guiding, aching. They spoke not what they understood, but what they had been carved to carry. And so the story continued. The watchers bound, the giants drowned or dreaming, the fire hidden, the tablets scattered, the memory smoldering beneath layers of soil and silence. And still the scroll turns. You may feel it now, not above you, within you. When something ancient stirs in your bones, though you've never walked the ruins. When you cry over a story no one ever taught you. When you dream in languages not your own. When you feel watched not by a presence but by purpose. That is the scroll. You are not reading it, you are part of it. A line in the unfolding. A word written in the ink of dust and breath and choice. The scroll waits for no reader. It waits for remembrance. And when that comes, the stars seem to breathe again. So I ask you, if you knew the sky was watching, would you still walk the same way beneath it? There are no hands that turn the scroll, no wind that moves its edges. It unrolls by will alone. The will that spun the stars and spoke the first breath into dust. The will that knows every heartbeat before it forms, every tear before it falls, every regret before it blooms. And though it is silent to the ears of men, it sings, not with melody, but with motion. Every shifting star is a syllable, every passing cloud a pause, every season a stanza in a poem so vast no angel has ever heard it end. And still it continues. It unrolled above Enoch's head the night he was taken. He saw it not with eyes, but with the soul pulled upward by longing, clothed in reverence, lifted by light no fire could mimic. As he passed from the world of soil into the realm of stillness, the scroll opened before him. He wept, not for fear, for beauty. Because beauty, true beauty, always bears sorrow at its edge. It reminds the soul of what was once near and is now distant. He saw the watchers' names burned like dim stars into the underside of the scroll, not crossed out, not forgotten, preserved, their choices recorded, their sorrow inked in flame. He saw the flood written as a wave of stilled light, not blue but silver and black, a tide that swept across whole lines of human thought and history. He saw the rise of Babel as a crack in the parchment, not from above but from within, pride reaching too high, words splintering like branches struck by lightning. He saw the scroll turn, and he saw the silence, a long, aching silence where no names were written, a pause in the song, a breath before the fire. And it was in that breath that he realized the scroll does not only record, it waits, it listens. It feels, it bends but does not break, it delays but never forgets. For the scroll is not a record of man, it is the echo of God's remembering. Every prophet carries a piece of it, not rolled in hand, but etched in soul. Musa, who struck the sea, Ibrahim, who broke the idols, Issa, who healed with word and silence. Each one moved as if pulled by something unseen because they were. The scroll unrolled behind them. and even the paths they did not choose were made sacred by the tension between mercy and judgment. They did not read it, they lived it, and when they passed, the scroll did not close, it waited again. It turned again, and new names began to form, but not all names are written with ink. Some are written in ash, some in tears, some in fire that refuses to burn away. And the giants, their names linger still, not upon the sacred line, but upon the margins, faint, flickering, not out of reach, but out of order. They are the questions in the scroll's quiet places, the unwelcome truth that cannot be erased, only endured. The scroll holds them too, not in glory, in warning, as a page turned down but never forgot. And what of us, we who walk under it unaware, we who rarely lift our eyes long enough to wonder what holds the heavens in place? We are not the readers, we are the words, every act a letter, every choice a mark, and the fire that does not burn, the tablets, the chains. They are punctuation. They remind the reader, the divine reader, when to pause, when to remember, when to begin again. And you are being written even now. The scroll has turned, and your name waits, not to be exalted, to be remembered. So live in a way that the stars would weep to see you fade, and ask yourself, if your life were a line in the sacred scroll, what would it say? There is a moment rare and quiet when the soul becomes still enough to hear the turning of the scroll, not with ears, but with wonder. It does not sound like paper, nor wind, nor the rustling of wings. It sounds like breath remembering its first rhythm, like the pause before a name is spoken for the very first time. This moment cannot be forced. It cannot be summoned. It arrives when the noise of the world has collapsed into silence, not the silence of emptiness, but of awe, when the heart has shed its armor, when the pride has crumbled like dried leaves, when the soul remembers it was once dust, chosen to be more. And in that stillness, if the scroll turns, you will feel it. It will not announce your name. It will not judge. It will carry you like a line remembered, like a prayer never spoken aloud, like a promise hidden in the marrow. You will know then that your life is not forgotten, that your weeping was recorded, that your patience was sacred, that even your silence was counted as praise. For this is how the scroll remembers. It holds the stars in place not with force but with story. And you, fragile, flawed, wandering, are part of that story. It does not require your greatness, only your truth. Even the fallen are written, even the forgotten are inked. Even the giants, those dreadful sons of sorrow, their names are woven into the margins, not erased, never glorified but remembered, because the scroll is not only a record of light. It is a testimony of what happens when light is refused. It is a mirror for those who think themselves gods. It is a reminder that pride has a gravity heavier than stone, but it is also grace. For even those whose names burned too brightly and fell, even they were given space in the memory of heaven, not to rise again, but to be understood. The scroll turns still. Even now, even as you breathe, it continues. Even as you forget, it remembers. Even as the world runs faster, it moves in silence, slow, sacred, eternal. And when the last line is written not by hand but by will, it will not close with thunder. It will not end with fire. It will pause. And in that pause, the earth will listen. The sea will still. The stars will bow. And the one who watches all things will speak, I remember. And what greater joy could there be than to be remembered by the one who holds the scroll? So be soft with your days, be true with your sorrow. Walk slowly beneath the sky, and know every moment is being written. You do not need to be known, only to be faithful, for the scroll does not forget what the world ignores, and the last line may yet belong to you. So I ask you as this chapter closes, if your name was read aloud in the halls of heaven, would the stars nod in reverence or turn away in silence? What happens to the sky when even the angels stop singing? There was a day not marked by sun or moon, not remembered in the calendars of men, when heaven fell silent, not from rage, not from sorrow, but from something older than both, witness. It was the day the decree was sealed, not whispered, not shouted, etched into the vault of heaven itself, where even the stars paused their circuits and held their fire in reverence. For what had begun could no longer be undone. The Watchers had fallen. Their names, once sung in harmony with the breath of creation, now rang hollow through the corridors of the unseen. No more songs echoed with their joy. No more praise carried their tone. They were not cast out in violence. They walked away in longing, and heaven stood still. The throne did not tremble, it wept, not as men weep, not with noise, but with silence so deep it unmade sound. The angels stopped, their wings folded. Their breath ceased. Even the ones nearest the throne, those whose names have never been spoken aloud, turned their gaze away from the world below. For to watch was now to mourn. The earth had been breached, not by evil, by yearning. A yearning so fierce it split glory from obedience. The Watchers had not rebelled to conquer. They had descended to be near. But nearness, when stolen, becomes theft. And so they fell, and the sky held its breath. The Most High, who speaks galaxies into form with a word, who calls the thunder like a servant, who bends time like reed grass in the wind, said nothing. For what could be spoken? Truth had already passed. The Watchers had made their vow. They would not return. They had chosen the scent of mortal skin over the nearness of the throne. They had chosen to plant their seed in dust, to offer divine knowledge to children not ready to hold it, to shape lives from longing instead of light. And so the decree was written. Not to punish, to balance. What had been broken must be named. What had been loosed must be bound. What had been remembered must be silenced for a time. And when the decree passed through the realms, it did not scream. It moved like smoke, like breath, like thought. And as it passed, the heavens stood still. The wind ceased, the waters stilled, the stars dimmed. And time, for one sacred moment, bowed its head. This was not anger, it was awe before the weight of consequence. Awe before the stillness of divine justice. No wrath was poured out that day. No flames fell from the sky, only silence. A silence so holy it scorched. A silence that stripped even the proudest angel of speech. A silence that remembered. It remembered the Watchers' first flight, their joy, their songs, their laughter echoing across the firmament. It remembered the way they looked when they beheld mankind, not with disdain, but with wonder. It remembered the moment wonder became desire. Desire became disobedience. Disobedience became dissent. And now the silence stood in their place. A silence that would not end until justice was fulfilled. And beneath that silence, the world moved on. Men married, children were born, cities rose, but the heavens had paused, the stars had turned away. And the sky watched without singing, watched without blessing, watched without breath, because something holy had been broken, and even eternity must mourn when glory falls. The silence did not descend like a veil. It was already there, waiting beneath every word, coiled in the breath of heaven itself, like a secret too sacred for speech. When the decree was etched, it did not begin the silence. It revealed it, and the silence became law. Not law written on scrolls, but upon time itself. The angels who had not fallen felt it in their wings. They did not lose their strength, they lost their song. The harmonies that once moved with the rhythm of creation faded, note by note, until only stillness remained. Not because they were forbidden to sing, but because they could not. There was nothing left to sing, not while the Watchers were still beneath the clouds. Not while the children of heaven had taken the daughters of earth and turned the breath of the divine into sorrow. It was not rage that froze the sky. It was reverence, for the Most High had withheld his voice. And when God withholds his voice, all things fall silent, even the wind, even the light, even time. The silence spread across the realms like a tide without foam, rolling over mountaintops, slipping through the cracks of ruined towers, echoing in the deep where the first cities were swallowed. The Nephilim, vast, burning, loud with the pride of fallen glory, did not hear it at first. They were too busy building, too busy conquering, too busy feasting. But slowly it crept into their bones. Their dreams darkened. The visions that once came like rivers of fire now became dry, splintered, broken. They awoke with dread they could not name. Their hands trembled as they touched the weapons they once held with ease. And in the stillness they began to hear things they had never noticed. The weeping of the earth, the creaking of the trees, the songs of birds absent. Even the animals knew something vast had shifted. And in that shift the light had changed. It was still bright but no longer warm. The Nephilim stood beneath the sun and found no comfort. Their shadows stretched farther than before, not because the sun had moved, but because the heavens had turned their face away. And when the giants cried out, roaring to the sky, daring it to answer, there was no thunder, only quiet. It was then that fear began to bloom, not among men, among the mighty. For silence is a weight no sword can lift, and the stillness of God is heavier than the wrath of armies. They sought answers. They climbed the peaks where their fathers first touched the clouds. They carved altars and spilled blood upon the rocks, hoping to stir a voice. But the sky did not speak, it only watched. And in that watching they began to understand they were no longer seen as sons. They were no longer stories to be told. They were echoes, consequences. And the silence, it was the preparation, the breath before the flood, the pause before the blade, the stillness before the storm. Even the earth, it seemed, had grown reverent. It did not rage, it did not moan. It simply held its breath just as heaven did, as though the whole world waited for the weight to fall. And in the deepest places beneath stone and memory, the watchers began to tremble. They could not hear the silence as men did. They felt it like fire. It moved through them, through their chains, through the hollows where they slept in darkness. It did not speak in words, it spoke in knowing. And they knew. The Most High had turned his gaze away, not in forgetfulness. In finality, they would not be lifted, they would not be named, they would not be heard again, and so they wept, not aloud. Tears were denied to them, but their sorrow passed through the soil like heat, unsettling the ground above, twisting the roots of ancient trees, pressing against the dreams of children not yet born. The world remembers sorrow even when the names are lost, and the silence of the heavens is the first sign that sorrow is near. So when the sky forgets to sing, when the stars burn, but do not shine, when the air itself seems to pause and listen for a voice that never comes, know this: it has happened before. And it will happen again. The skies had not broken, no stars had fallen, no mountains had split, and yet all of creation held its breath. It was the stillness before the decree took flesh, before water was given permission to rise, before the sorrow of heaven was carved into the veins of the earth. Enoch in the high places beyond the veil had seen it. He did not hear words. There were none. Only a silence so complete, so pure, so unbearably holy, it stripped every thought from his spirit. He was not terrified, he was undone. He saw the throne, not as flame, not as light, as presence, weight without burden, love without limit, sorrow without sound. And he saw the faces of the angels. They did not sing, they did not speak. They bowed not in obedience, but in mourning. For 1/3 of the sky had turned its gaze downward, not in war, but in longing. And now that longing had cracked the harmony of all things. Enoch wept, for the watchers he had once walked beside, for the world that would now drown, for the story that could no longer be rewritten. But the silence did not weep with him, it simply was. And then it moved, not like a storm, like breath. The silence passed over the earth, soft, steady, final. It passed over the mountains, the altars, the tombs, the temples carved by giants, the bones of men, the scrolls of prophets, the faces of children who had never known a world where the stars did not sing. It passed and was gone, but it left something behind. Not judgment, not wrath, stillness. A stillness that has never fully left. Even now, when you wake in the middle of the night and the world feels too quiet, it is not emptiness, it is remembrance of a day when heaven stopped moving, when the very breath of creation was held not to destroy but to grieve. For God does not rage like men. He grieves as only the infinite can, without noise, without end, without forgetting. And in that grief came mercy, not instead of the flood, but through it. Flood was not rage, it was silence made visible. It was the cleansing of the echo. It was the sound of sorrow falling. And still the heavens remain quiet. They have not sung since that day. Oh, they shine, they burn, they guide, but they have not sung, because something is still broken. And the final song, the one that will rise when all things are made right, waits until the watchers are judged, until the giants are named, until the last echo of rebellion has been answered not with fire but with remembrance, until the earth itself, tired of bearing our forgetting, can finally exhale. Until then, the heavens hold still, not in fear, in reverence. And you who walk beneath that stillness, you are not forgot. You are seen by the one who waits to sing again. So carry your silence with care. It is sacred. It is part of a story too old for books and too wide for names. It is the memory of a day the sky stood still. And I ask you now, if the heavens never sang again, would you still raise your voice in the dark? When the earth remembers what man tries to bury, who will listen to its cry? It began with one voice, not shouted, not sung, spilled, the voice of blood, not in word but in presence. And the ground heard it, not the heavens, not the stars, the earth. The soil that had once embraced the feet of Adam, the dust that had once been shaped into breath, now trembled, for it had swallowed something holy. It had tasted death for the first time, and it mourned. The first murder, the first echo, the first sorrow not from the sky but from man, Habel, a name the wind still carries though the world forgets. He did not cry out, but his blood did. And the earth, created to cradle life, now bore witness to its taking. And so it learned. The ground became a scribe, recording every drop, every wound, every silence that followed a scream. It remembered the blood of prophets. It remembered the blood of slaves. It remembered the blood of the fallen giants, not in honor but in sorrow, for the Nephilim too bled. And when they fell, whether by flood, by sword, or by their own ruin, the earth received them, not with joy, with reverence, because blood once given speaks. It does not ask for revenge, it asks to be known. And so the world became heavy, not with weight, with memory. The soil under your feet holds more than roots. It holds names, some long forgot, some too holy to speak. When Mahway returned from Enoch's vision, he walked not as a warrior, but as one who knew the ground beneath him was alive with remembrance. Every footprint he left pressed not only into soil, but into history. He had seen what the flood would bring, but he had also felt the cry beneath his feet. It came from the places where giants had died with no one to weep for them. It came from the cities where women had been taken, not for love, but for lineage. It came from the fields where children played beneath shadows too large to understand, and then disappeared. The blood cried. And the earth did not forget, and Mahway wept. He knew his name would not be remembered in honor. He knew his kin would be washed from the world like dust from stone, but the ground would remember them. The wind would carry the ache, and the silence above would not erase what had sunk below. For every death shapes the soil, and every injustice tilts the balance of the world. Even now, centuries beyond the flood, lifetimes beyond the cries, the earth still shivers when blood falls without reason. It recoils. Not in rage, in grief, because the earth too was once a garden, and it remembers, not only the feet of angels, but the hands of the slain, the eyes of the dying, the voices of those who were never buried with names. It remembers the watchers who fell, but also the women who bore the cost. It remembers the Nephilim who shattered mountains, but also the quiet ones, those who sought forgiveness before the flood took them. And it holds them all, not equally, but honestly, because memory is not judgment. It is truth, and the ground, unlike men, cannot lie. It cannot forget, even when we do. And so I ask you, if the blood beneath your feet began to whisper, would you stop to listen or keep walking? The prophets have always walked with careful feet, not because the stones would harm them, but because they knew the earth was listening. Their sandals touched dust like hands touch holy pages. Their steps were not taken in haste. Each one fell with reverence, as if to say, I know you remember. For the earth, the soil, the stone, the deep hollow beneath was never merely ground. It was the keeper of secrets, of sorrow, of sacrifice. It knew the difference between blood spilled in defiance and blood spilled in offering, and it trembled accordingly. When the Nephilim were slain, their blood did not fade quickly. The earth rejected it at first. It steamed, hissed, refused to sink. The soil recoiled from their might, their madness, their mingled origin, but it could not refuse them forever. So it took them in, not to hide them, to hold their memory. And it did not hold only their deaths, it held the weight of their lives, their cruelty, their confusion, their loneliness, because even monsters have sorrow, even giants had hearts that once beat with wonder. The Watchers had fallen, but their sons had been born not by will of heaven, but by ache. And ache is not sin, it is sorrow misdirected. The blood of the Nephilim carried songs too complex for human tongues. Their death cries were not just pain, they were memory unraveling. They remembered a light they never knew. They feared a silence they did not understand. And so when they fell, the ground sang, not loudly, like a hum deep in the belly of the world, a mourning, a low, endless tone. Some say that when you walk near certain cliffs, you can feel it, not hear it. Feel it in the soles of your feet, in the soft part of your chest, just behind the heart. That is the mourning of the earth. For those who fell too far to be forgiven, but too near to be forgotten. There are old valleys where the blood still marks the stones, not visibly, but in the way nothing grows, in the way birds do not nest, in the way even the wind moves around the space as if not to disturb something sleeping. And in these places some men have built temples, not to worship, to remember. They gather there not with songs but with silence. They press their hands into the stone and they weep for what they cannot name. Because deep within them the memory stirs. You see, blood is not only in veins, it is in lineage, in breath, in ache, in the things we inherit but do not understand. There are those alive today whose dreams still echo with the cries of the flood, who see cities that no longer exist, who feel sorrow they never lived, because somewhere in their blood, not their mind, not their bones, the earth's memory speaks. And it tells them, you are not alone. You carry more than yourself. You carry history. You carry ache. You carry the consequence of every voice that cried out and was buried. And if you listen, truly listen, you will hear it, not with ears, with soul, a low hum like the world remembering itself. And it is in that remembrance that truth returns, not as punishment, as invitation, because to forget is to fall, but to remember is to return. Not to the giants, not to the Watchers, to the story that came before them, the one etched in dust and fire and breath, the one where man walked in gardens and angels stood watch, the one where blood had never yet spoken, the one that still waits beneath your feet. So tell me, when you hear the ground sigh beneath you, do you call it weariness or do you call it remembrance? The flood washed the surface. It drowned the cities. It broke the towers. It swept the bones of kings into the mouth of the sea, but it could not cleanse what the earth had already kept. For beneath every riverbed, beneath every dune and forest floor, beneath the feet of those who call themselves modern, the blood still whispers, not to accuse, to be remembered, because the blood that cries from the ground is not crying for vengeance, it cries for truth, truth unspoken, truth buried beneath centuries of forgetting. Truth that burns softly in the veins of those who carry silence as inheritance. And the Watchers, they heard it. Even in chains, bound beneath the mountains, sealed in silence, they heard the ground murmur. They felt the tremble of memory rising like smoke through stone. Each drop of blood they caused was recorded, each sorrow added to their weight, not by wrath but by remembering. Their punishment was not merely to fall. It was to feel what they had done, to be bound not just in shadow, but in truth. Azazel beneath his mountain of blackened earth has not slept for an age. His eyes are blind, but he sees. Not forward, not outward, inward. He sees the faces of the children taught to war. He sees the eyes of the women he adorned with forbidden beauty. He sees the flame he lit, now crawling through generations, disguised as glory. And the blood, all of it, lives beneath him. He can feel its memory rising like steam. He can feel the earth pressing against him, not to crush, but to remind. Samyaza, deeper still, does not weep. He listens. He listens to the ground like one listens to a prophet, because he knows it speaks with a voice that was never meant to be ignored. And that voice is getting louder, not in volume, in sorrow. The Nephilim, those who died in violence, in fear, in grief, they too are written into the earth. The ground does not favor the righteous or the wicked. It holds them all. It remembers them all. For remembrance is not reward. It is responsibility. And what of us? We build atop the graves of the forgotten. We pave roads over fields where angels once knelt. We raise towers on the backs of stories we refuse to carry. But the earth has not forgotten. It remembers every prayer whispered into the soil, every promise broken in the dust, every sacrifice made without witness. And in time it will speak, not in wrath, in revelation, in the opening of dreams long sealed, in the stirring of bones beneath silent hills, in the trembling of footsteps that echo louder than they should. When the cry of the ground is finally heard, truly heard, it will not condemn, it will remind, and that reminder will change the world, not by fire, not by flood, by truth, a truth so old it must be felt before it is believed. So listen now, not to my voice, to the hum beneath your breath, to the ache beneath your steps, to the weight that rises when you pass the place where something once wept and was buried. That is the blood, still speaking, still waiting, still holy. So I ask you in the hush that follows this chapter, if your blood one day cried from the ground, what would it say? What if the last word ever spoken was already spoken once before? The world has not yet heard the last echo. It moves still, not through valleys or wind or memory, but through time itself. It does not fade. It bends. It waits. It circles like a hawk above a forgotten battlefield, patient as the dust returns to its shape. This echo is not the voice of man, nor angel, nor beast. It is the breath that remains after the breath has ceased. The sound that comes after the last word, the hum beneath history. It is what remains when all else has fallen silent. And it waits, not because it is lost, but because it is the answer to a question not yet asked. When the watchers were cast into shadow, when the Nephilim were swallowed by the sea, when the prophets stopped writing and the fires cooled, the echo remained. Not as warning, as witness. It has no shape, no edge, no name, but it carries all names within it, names that were spoken and names that were buried, names of angels who fell and men who remembered, names of those who prayed and were not heard and those who were heard and did not know it. It carries the sound of the chains tightening beneath the mountains, the hush before the flood, the breath between the lifting of the ark and the falling of the world, and it grows, not in loudness, in clarity, like something returning to the place it was first spoken. Enoch heard it, not with ears, with soul. The moment he was lifted beyond the veil, it met him not as voice but as fullness, as the sound of a story nearly complete. And in that moment he knew the end is not the end, the silence is not empty. There is an echo that has been gathering, collecting the weight of every sorrow, every whisper, every prayer too small for language. And one day it will return, not to shatter, to complete. Because silence to the divine is not absence, it is patience. And the echo, it is not a sound, it is a returning, a remembering, a moment when all things that were once scattered will be drawn back together, not into a city or a war or a name, but into truth. The echo holds the story entire, from the garden to the grave, from the first light to the last flood, from the fall to the forgiveness. And when it comes, when the final seal is broken and the watchers rise to be named, the echo will rise with them, not to restore them, to name what they became, to mark what was done, to end the silence, not with vengeance, with truth. That is how the story will end, not with thunder or scream, but with a voice that has waited since the beginning to be heard. Your voice. Because that echo, it waits for an answer, and only you can give it. So I ask you with sacred breath, if the last word of the story were yours, what would you say? There are echoes that fade and there are echoes that return. The ones that fade are born of noise, of pride, of haste. They rattle through time like dry leaves across stone, seen for a moment, heard for a breath, and then gone. But the echoes that return, they are made of stillness, of truth, of ache. They were never meant to be loud, only to last. The echo that has waited since the fall of the watchers is such a one. It has passed through deserts, over ruins, beneath oceans, and inside bones. It has drifted through the sighs of widows and the tears of prophets. It has circled the mount where the flood began and the cave where Enoch vanished. It has rested in the breath between the words of every sacred book. And it has waited, not for power, for someone who would stop long enough to feel it. You see, this echo does not speak in thunder. It speaks in remembrance. It is the sound of the fire that does not burn, the breath of the tablets that still hum in forgotten caves, the rustle of chains beneath blackened stone, the hush in the tombs where Nephilim still sleep, the quiver in a prophet's heart when the veil grows thin. It is the echo of everything heaven once sang before the singing stopped. And one day the silence that has stretched like a veil across the centuries will tear, not with violence, with light. And what has waited will speak again, but it will not be new. It will not be revelation. It will be return, because the end of the story is its beginning. And the echo that ends the silence will say the same thing that was whispered over dust when it first became flesh. You are known. That was the sound that gave Adam breath. That was the word the watchers could not bear to hear unspoken. That was the truth the Nephilim never found in their strength. To be known, not as giants, not as angels, not as kings, but as vessels of sorrow and glory and choice. The echo is returning, not to the world as it pretends to be, to the world as it truly is, beneath the stone, behind the breath, beneath the stories we tell ourselves to forget what we were meant to remember. It will come not in a temple, but in the empty places, the deserts, the ruins, the dreams. And when it comes, those who have ears to feel, not just to hear, will tremble, not in fear, in recognition, because something old will awaken in them, not from books, from blood, from memory that predates their bones, and it will say, you are part of what was lost. And then silence will break, not like glass, like dawn, soft, certain, unstoppable, and in that breaking the sky will not fall, it will bend. It will lean close again, not to judge, to remember. The stars will burn a little brighter. The stones will grow warm beneath the feet of those who still walk softly. And for a moment, just a moment, the world will remember what it means to be seen, as you are, as you were always meant to be. And the echo will sing again. And when it does, it will carry names. Not names shouted in crowds, not titles earned in war, but names only heaven knows. Names carved into the scroll before time began. Names whispered into the silence after the flood. Names buried in the ground, in the fire, in the flood, in the sky. And one of those names will be yours. So I ask you, when your name is called from the silence, will you rise to answer or hide in the noise? It is written not in books, not in stone, not in the breath of prophets, but in the folds between moments, that the last sound the world will hear before it ends will not be thunder. It will be a name, not spoken in wrath, not shouted in fear, whispered, like a mother to her child, like a lover in the stillness of night, like a fire remembering who it once warmed. This name will not belong to kings, nor angels, nor giants. It will belong to the one who listened. One who stayed awake when the world slept, the one who remembered when all others chose forgetting, the one who carried silence not as a burden but as a prayer. And when that name is spoken, the veil will lift, the watchers will stir in their chains, the Nephilim will turn in their sleep, the fire that does not burn will rise in brightness, and the dream tablets lost to time, scattered like ash, will hum with completion. The scroll will stop turning, not because the story is over, because it has come home. The echo that ends the silence is not a sound. It is a return to the garden, to the word, to the breath, to the first light that kissed the face of dust and called it beloved. All things that were scattered will gather. All that was hidden will be revealed, not in spectacle but in stillness. And it will not be terrifying, it will be true, because the end of all things is not destruction, it is remembering. Heaven will not descend in fire. It will open like a door remembered after a long exile. And when it does, the earth will breathe again. The ground which has wept for ages will exhale. The mountains which have borne the silence will lower their heads. The stars will hum not a new song, but the first one, the one they've kept silent since the fall. And those who still walk in dust will know, without word, without proof, without doubt, that the echo has returned, not to punish, to complete. And in that completion, all names will rise, the fallen will be judged, the faithful will be known. And silence, the great silence, the ancient stillness that hovered over the waters before light, will end, not with a roar, but with a whisper that was always waiting to be answered. A whisper shaped like your name. So walk softly, beloved listener. You are closer to the echo than you know. And as the final lines of this sacred remembering fade into the hush of your room, into the slow rhythm of your breath, I ask you not to understand, not to explain, only to feel you were never forgotten. You are still being written, and the silence is not the end. It is the waiting place for your voice. So I leave you now with the final question. If the echo called your name tonight, would you rise in silence or in song?